Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, and welcome to an all new pair of Ace in the Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode, I shall be reviewing the BF-109 G-2 trop, a Tier 3, Battle Rating 5.0 German fighter. As always, starting with the plane's history, which today covers the inception of the G variant of the BF-109 through to the G-2 subvariant, we begin thus. By the initiation of Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941, the Messerschmitt BF-109 was starting to near the peak of its development life cycle, with the arguably definitive subvariant, the F4, having just entered service. Rather than invest major efforts to develop a successor to the BF-109 now, the Luftwaffe continued to encourage the revision and subsequent mass production of the BF-109 design. The next stage in the design's development, the G variant, would see a shift in tone from a focus on manoeuvrability and handling to one centred around speed. Additionally, the design had to respect the changing nature of the war in the skies. To meet these requirements, the following changes were made. The introduction of the 1,475 horsepower Daimler-Benz DB605A1 12-cylinder liquid-cooled inverted V engine, which was a refinement of the preceding 1,350 horsepower Daimler-Benz DB601E1 engine as used by the F4 subvariant. To accommodate the new engine, the structure of the engine housing had to be strengthened. And secondly, the addition of cockpit pressurisation for high altitude operations, as denoted externally by heavier welded framing for the cockpit. However, these changes increased the aircraft's mass, putting too much strain on the existing undercarriage. In response, a more robust but heavier undercarriage was introduced, further increasing the aircraft's overall mass. Beyond these changes, the plane was to externally remain very similar to the F4, still fielding the standard armament of two 7.92mm MG17 machine guns with 500 rounds per gun, as housed in the engine cowling, and a single 20mm MG151 cannon with 150 rounds, as housed between the cylinder banks of the engine, firing through the propeller hub. The G design was to come to life as of September 1941, with production of a pre-production batch of G0 fighters being initiated. The DB605A1 engine was not available at the time these aircraft started rolling off the production line in October of 1941, leading to them fielding DB601E1 engines instead. The first production series subvariant, the G1, started to leave the assembly lines in March of 1942, with a total of 167 produced by June of 1942. This subvariant saw the introduction of the GM1 nitrous oxide injection as contained in a tank mounted in the rear fuselage. The G2 subvariant soon followed by the end of March 1942, being identical to the G1 bar the removal of the cockpit pressurisation system. A total of 1,586 G2s were produced by February 1943. The G2 was the first G subvariant to enter service, with Gruppe 1 of Jaguar 2 as based in France, receiving the aircraft by late April 1942. In service, the performance improvements of the G variant came to life through the G2, with the plane considerably outperforming its contemporary adversary, the British Royal Air Force's Spitfire Mark V, during their initial encounters in May of 1942. A number of Versatility, or field modification kits, were experimented with for the G2, including but not limited to the G2R1 Jabot Ray, long-range fighter bomber that could carry a single 1,102 pound or 500 kg bomb under the main fuselage, along with two 66-gallon drop tanks under wing. Only a single prototype of this modification was produced. There was also the G2R2 reconnaissance fighter, which saw the removal of the 20mm MG151 cannon and installation of a camera in the rear fuselage. And finally, perhaps the more notable one, the G2R6, which saw the addition of two more 20mm MG151 cannon as mounted in underwing gondola pods with 135 rounds per cannon. The model seen on screen today, the G2 trop, represents a tropicalised version of the G2 for use in North Africa. The G2 as a whole was succeeded on the production lines by the G5 and G6 subvariants by November of 1942. And so, with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the BF-109 G2 trop handles in the skies of War Thunder Arcade. Our first gameplay for today takes place on the ground strike map Clift Coast. For this we'll be using the following setup. Stealth belts are machine guns, the reasoning being in my experience the stealth belts offer the greatest damage output over time, but really we're focused on our 20mm cannon, and for that we're taking the air target belts due to their higher proportion of high explosive incendiary mining shot shells compared to the other belts available, these shells being absolutely devastating against any given fight in the skies, and with their nice muzzle velocity of 785 meters per second means that we can engage foes all the way out to their maximum range of 1.5 kilometers without too much difficulty, whether it be in an interception pass or a head to head. As for our gun convergence, we have it set to 500 meters as standard for aircraft which have all their armament based on the center line, not convergence reliant. And as for our fuel load, we are taking the standard amount of 30 minutes to ensure we can make it to the end of the game, unscathed on fuel capacity. We begin our analysis as always by talking about the plane's climb rate, and in the case of the G-2 trop at a battle rating of 5.0, I would argue it has the best climb rate of that battle rating, only being equalled by the likes of the first of the Griffin Spitfires, i.e. the Mark 14. In that this plane not only has the overall climb rate, it also has the climb sustainability to give you the option to go all the way up to 6,000 meters through web cycling and a 25-degree angle climb in a single climbing run. You do not need to level out the plane, build up speed and start again, and you're seeing that here, and it also applies in airfield domination games when the spawning altitude is lower, in the region of 1,100 to 1,500 meters. Albeit there you may want to use a climb angle of 24 or 23 degrees just to make things a little bit easier and avoid gradually heading towards the need to level out too early. And this puts the plane in a prime position once you're up at altitude, because if there's nobody up on height as we're seeing here, because we've been able to outclimb everyone in the first instance, it means you can start considering dropping down those foes who are still climbing and catch them out, such as this Fokker 190A5 is pretty much on the verge of a stall by the looks of things. As we swing down on top of them, we'll rip them apart for our first kill. Now what's important to note is when you go into a boom and zoom pass or just diving on foes as seen there, you're actually going to be playing against one of the difficulties of the G-2 trop. This plane can do well in diving strikes, but its dive acceleration is above average only to 600 km an hour, at which point it starts to gradually drop off. This is not too much of a problem until you get to 800 km an hour, then it becomes rather noticeable and it's a long path to get to your maximum dive speed of 946 km an hour, which by itself is good but will be outrun by the likes of the P-47N Thunderbolt. There's a couple other examples as well, such as an F-82E Twin Mustang. All these planes are gradually outpacing you in an extended dive. Nonetheless, you're able to drop down on foes with relative aplomb, but then the difficulty also comes in on the fact that your control surfaces do suffer a little bit in a high-speed dive, such as your roll rate. Now the roll rate is the most noticeable, because at standard it's average at best. You have not got the highest roll rate at your battle rating by a considerable margin, that being conferred to the likes of say the Fokker 190s that you see, and on top of that the P-47 Thunderbolts. But instead, between 600 and 800 km an hour, you'll find that your roll rate drops by 50%, meaning that changing direction mid-boom and zoom strike is rather difficult, and if a foe decides to make a sharp manoeuvre and roll their plane, such as what we saw there to a degree with that Spitfire, you're going to have difficulty following them unless you anticipate what they're going to do in the first instance. So you need to try and think ahead, right, how can I follow my foe and get the cleanest shot on target? And I'll come round about the concept of a clean shot on target in another point a little bit later on. As for your rudder meanwhile, you also find that whilst your rudder is extremely strong in the first instance and gives you a large portion of your turn fighting capability, between 700 and 800 km an hour, your initial response remains as strong, but the rudder starts to slacken somewhat if you continue to use it beyond the initial response. And that means that whilst you can make very precise adjustments in the first instance on your rudder, if you continue to use your rudder to try and follow a foe in a boom and zoom dive, again you are going to start falling behind in tracking them, because you're not able to retain your rudder as well. The final item, the elevator, is not too heavily affected. It's above average as standard, and what you'll find is between 775 and 800 km an hour, it will drop by 10% on initial response. But this is again barely noticeable and means you're not prone to running out of elevator performance as you go to higher and higher speeds. Now here I end up in a 2 vs 1, a G55 Series 0 and a Spitfire LF Mark 9, and what you're seeing right now is the climb rate performance and the engine power of the G2 trop coming into effect as we simply go into a spiral climb and force both of our opposition to stall out. Keeping in mind that the Spitfire LF Mark 9 may have come into the engagement with roughly the same energy as us, but we have the superior sustainability on our engine power. And this is why the G2 trop gets a reputation for being an absolute monster in the vertical, because it simply has so much engine power to give, even by comparison with the preceding F4, a review of which we have provided recently on the F4 trop. Use the link in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now for reference. Nonetheless, having brought down the G55, the Spitfire seems to have broken off and now going after this Fokker 190. Let's now move away from the high speed situation and come into the concept of standard turn fighting capability. What you'll find is the turn circle of this plane by itself is not going to win it any favours. It's average at best in its ideal speed range of 375 to 575 km an hour and is comparable to the likes of the Yakovlev Yak 9P. Below 350 km an hour it becomes increasingly wide, heading into the region of say a P51 D30 Mustang in the same speed range. It's your rudder that will make up the deficit. in that your rudder is extremely strong to the point that you can throw this plane around on its rudder with a very tight rudder turn circle, only falling behind the likes of the Japanese A6M5. Meaning that for turn fighting, you can outturn a Spitfire if you use your rudder in order to support your turn circle. If you're just going to rely on your standard turn circle of rolling the plane 90 degrees and pulling up on the elevator and using combat or landing flaps, then the Spitfires will have the advantage. Throw the rudder in and you're at least on the equivalent level, if not slightly superior, because the Spitfire will bleed more energy in the turn fight over time compared to your own aircraft. And here we can see in this set of scissors against the Messerschmitt 109F4, we have the greater engine power, but otherwise we're rather matched in manoeuvrability, and that gives us the ability, by bringing our rudder as well, to swing the plane around and bring down the F4 in terms of their aspirations to take us out, instead of having to look towards this head-to-head with Messerschmitt 410B6R3, and we cannot afford to get ripped to pieces by the 30mm cannon in the nose. So another 2 versus 1, let's see if we can get out of it. In the meantime then, putting some machine gun rounds into the back of the F4, and we can see the turn fighting capabilities of the G-2 trop really being highlighted throughout this gameplay. One other thing to note, and it's a rather important item, is the fact that whilst you have all this performance and manoeuvrability, one thing that can let you down, and you may have noticed it with me here, is the need to be extremely precise with your 20mm cannon. Now I say this because I've actually been spoilt with a number of planes that I've reviewed recently which have multiple cannon in the nose. I've had to adjust my playstyle to accommodate the fact you have a single 20mm cannon in the case of the Messerschmitt 109 G2 trop, and that means that you need to be accurate with this cannon. Because if you're even slightly off centre on the target when you open fire, then you'll score a number of hits, particularly with your machine gun rounds, but you're not going to be scoring those damaging hits with the 20mm cannon to achieve the quick kill. And that's not to say the firepower of the G2 trop is atrocious, it just requires you to get used to the concept you need to be 100% accurate at all costs, otherwise you're only going to be picking up scratching shots or the occasional critical hit. And that's why a number of kills have actually escaped me over the course of this game, not through the fault of the plane, but because I'm not being accurate enough. But nonetheless, be accurate on target, and we've already seen the results. Planes literally just fall out of the sky in a very quick fashion. Now you may be arguing as well, what about going after enemy bombers because you have a single 20mm cannon? Well, it requires a little bit more effort to bring down the bombers in terms of you're going to have to put a significant number of rounds in, but the bombers will still come down in a quick 1 to 2 second burst, whereas with say a 30mm cannon of the J7W1 which we reviewed recently, those cannon will rip a bomber apart without hesitation. Here you just need to be a little bit more focused on the target and put a little bit more time in, and therefore run a greater risk of taking some return fire. And that brings us on to the concept of durability of the G2 trop, in that the durability of this aircraft is below average, and you need to be very cautious of the fact that when this plane is hit, it can take a considerable amount of damage very quickly, as we pick up our double strike, taking out an F2 there after the Focke-Wulf. So you want to avoid getting hit at all costs, and if you take hits to the wings, you'll find that the wings very quickly shear off of the aircraft. And you can see in the bottom left hand corner of our screen we've only taken scratching shots so far, but the plane's already got considerable damage towards the tail section. Fortunately no damage to the actual tail control surfaces, i.e. the elevator or the rudder, as we now break away. In a straight line, coming on to straight line acceleration, what you'll find is that the plane is rather fast to 425 km an hour from its rather low stall speed of 125 km an hour. And do keep in mind this stall speed is so low because the plane has such a powerful engine, it gives this aircraft the ability to keep on going in a vertical climb, say 50 degrees or more, to the point it's practically heading towards stall speeds of a 0 by the time it's actually forced to start levelling out. And in its stall recovery, it's a good but gradual one in that you just need to gradually get the nose down and level the plane out. The nose will dip slightly below the level line, build up to 215 km an hour speed, which costs you very little altitude, and you're back in the game. But nonetheless, when going into the straight line acceleration region, you're faster 425 as previously said, and on more emergency power you'll kick this threshold up to 525 km an hour. Then there's a gradual drop off in acceleration, but this means that you can get up to your idle speed range very quickly, at 375 to 575 km an hour, and be ready to fight once again. Now what about altitude as we go hunting this Heinkel 111 to show off our bomber hunting capabilities? Well, in ideal altitude performance, what you'll find is between 2,500 and 5,500 metres altitude, you'll be at your best. There is a drop off in engine performance below 2,000 metres, quite noticeable in terms of straight line acceleration and also to a degree in climb rate, so where possible you never want to drop below 2,000 metres. And at the other end of the spectrum, once you get to 6,000 metres, you'll find that you hit both your maximum engine performance range and also your maximum control playability. In that with your engine you'll experience a gradual drop in acceleration at 6,000 metres, and as for your control surfaces, at 6,000 metres there's an additional heaviness added to both the elevator and the rudder. And in the midst of a standard turn, your rudder will really start to wobble in a turn above 6,000 metres altitude, which is a concern. Because if you come out of your ideal speed range and go below 300 km an hour in particular, you'll find this wobble also exists on the rudder when you come out of manoeuvres. The rudder of this aircraft is rather sensitive thanks to the fact it's so powerful, and that means that every so often when you finish off a manoeuvre, you'll find that the plane wants to snap about on the rudder for a little bit before finally stabilising and flying in a straight line once more. When you initially drop out of your ideal speed range and go below 350 km an hour, the rudder wobble is not too noticeable, but what you'll find is your elevator starts to become heavy. So really the general mantra is never go below 350 km an hour in an extended engagement unless you're using a set of scissors, for example, as we saw earlier on, because otherwise you're going to be dealing with initially a heavy elevator, and then as you go below that 300 km an hour mark, you'll be starting to experience that rudder wobble, which is going to annoy you somewhat and perhaps take away a clean shot on target. Talking about clean shots, there's the P-51D30 burning. Now we break up and away, and this comes onto the concept of energy retention, and the energy retention of the G2 trop, as you may have already guessed, is extremely powerful. Now in a straight line you'll find that when you level out after coming out of an extreme dive, you'll retain your energy to a good degree, meaning that your speed is going to hold at about 565 km an hour. And where this plane really shines is both in the horizontal and the vertical. It's good in the horizontal in the fact that you're able to maintain your speed even with combat flaps active in a standard set of turns, at a point of 320 km an hour, and that's because your engine power gives you the ability to remain in your dogfight, building up speed between manoeuvres, so that way you can just keep on going and stay in the mix rather than stall out compared to say a Spitfire Mark 9. In the vertical, however, the picture gets even more rosy, in that with a 30-degree angle return climb, you can return over the distance of 2,200 metres on engine power alone. So you start off at 5,000 metres altitude, going to a dead vertical dive, all the way down to what would be 2,800 metres altitude, and then going to that return 30-degree climb, you'll be able to get all that altitude back. Whereas with War Emergency Power, this threshold is kicked up to an absolutely staggering 3,000 metres, giving this plane absolutely phenomenal boom and zoom capability, or the ability just to dive down on a single photo and break away, or use a dive to get away and then climb back up to altitude on the other side of the map. And here, having taken a number of hits from the twin Mustang, we finally come around using our rudder to do so, picking off our final kill of the game. And we made a mistake there of trying to loop over the top of the twin Mustang. They were too far away for us to do that successfully, and we took multiple hits. And note how much damage we took, and particularly on the engine. A limited number of hits can very quickly cause your engine to go black, and that may be the first thing that breaks before the rest of the plane. So do be wary of that, and right now we're heading back to the airfield, but there's no need to as the game comes to its end, and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. Using our G2 trop in the dedicated fighter role for this gameplay, every so often breaking into the interceptor role where required, such as against the Heinkel 111, we're able to pick up 8 kills and 2 assists, netting us 30,342 Silver Lions and 3,068 research points. Hopefully this initial gameplay has demonstrated how much performance is available to you when flying the fully upgraded G2 trop, in that you have the ability to outclimb the vast majority, if not all of the opposition, in the opening sequence of the game, or in the later stages when you get off to the rear or the side of the map, and once you're above the opposition, you can really rain down the pain, whether it be via boom and zoom, alternatively switching into turn fighting in a 1 versus 1 or many versus 1 scenario, because you have the overall manoeuvrability on this aircraft within its ideal speed range to really get the most out of it and turn the tables against even those who would consider themselves more powerful turn fighters, such as the Spitfire LF Mark 9. The simple reason being, whilst you have the average turn circle as standard, your rudder more than makes up for it and gives you the ability to come around on the spot very quickly. But this now brings us on to the question, what happens when you mount the R6 modification and triple your cannon-based firepower with the 2 pods under wing? Well, let's get to it. For our final gameplay of today, we're on the ground strike map Lonely Island using the same setup as before, albeit with 2 configuration changes. The first, the most obvious one, is that we've equipped the R6 modification in our secondary weapon slot. The less obvious one perhaps is that we changed our gun convergence setting to 400 metres to account for the fact that the underwing pods are convergence reliant, and I found my best results have come with a 400 metre setting, where it being long distance head to head, turn fighting, boom and zoom or interception passes. We're going to open up with the same climbing strategy as before, and that immediately provides us with a point of comparison. That is, how is your climb rate affected by having the R6 modification? Well, if you take a clean G2 trop and then one with the R6 modification, start them both at 2,000 metres altitude, have them climb via web cycling from 2,000 metres to 5,000 metres altitude at a 25-degree angle of climb, what you'll find in my experience is that the planes are not too noticeably different, and the only thing statistically that changes is whereas the clean G2 trop will get to 5,000 metres in a given period of time, in that same period of time the R6 modification G2 trop will have got to 4,850 metres altitude. It's not too much of a difference then, that 150 metre gap, it's there, but it doesn't give the clean G2 trop too much of an energy advantage, and then both planes will level out if they want and go into their respective engagements. Alternatively, they can keep on climbing because they both retain the same climb rate sustainability. That means having the pods doesn't exactly detract from your climb rate unless you're going up against a dedicated G2 trop that's flying clean and is looking to hunt you down in the first point. Now, levelling out and looking towards the opposition, looking at this Corsair off in the distance, we can also see a small impact in terms of overall acceleration, whether it be in a straight line or in the dive. We'll focus first off in the dive because we're trying to chase after this Corsair, who's going to outdive us with their better overall acceleration in the dive and their higher maximum dive speed. Your maximum dive speed now drops to 938 km an hour. That's a drop in 8 km now. Not too heavy, really. Whatever planes that you couldn't catch at maximum dive speed before are still going to be out of touch with you, and it doesn't really change up what couldn't catch you before in a dive in terms of it being able to outrun you now. You're still in that good position, but you're not going to be the best at your batter rating for maximum dive speed. Your dive acceleration is relatively unaffected as well, in that the only difference is now at 600 km an hour, whereas before we mentioned there is a gradual drop off that's not too noticeable. It becomes a little bit more noticeable, but not to the point that we can say that that is now the main cliff, whereas the main cliff is still at 800 km now. And coming around into the straight line category, what you'll find is whereas the thresholds were 425 and 525 km an hour before, that's engine power alone and wet respectively, it's now dropped in both cases by 15 km an hour, so 410 and 510 km an hour. Again, nothing major, but it's just there and you have to be aware of it. Meaning whatever you couldn't catch in a straight line before, you still will not be able to catch, and whatever couldn't catch you before is still going to struggle to catch you. It's only the planes within roughly the same regions or thresholds that will start to perhaps gain a tiny bit of an advantage on you, but that's very specific cases and nothing major to note. We tried getting some shots there on the F4 trop that went into the dive, but we didn't get a very clean shot on target. But instead now we're going to go head to head with the C205 and we're going to tear them to pieces, and this is where having the tripling of your cannon armament can really work in your favour. That's not to say if you only had a single 20mm cannon, head-ons like that would not be possible. You just have to be a lot more precise in your aim. That's something we talked about in the first gameplay, that when you're flying in the dedicated fighter configuration, you need to have that precision about your aim. Here that need is taken away a degree, and by having it stripped it means you can be a little bit more flexible with your aim and not have to commit as heavily to really focusing on the target to bring them down, because you've got plenty of ammunition and a high burst mass to chuck at your foes. Now coming down this Messerschmitt 109 F4, another F4, we can't get a clean shot on target at the moment. We're experiencing the same difficulty as before in the high speed dive, in that our roll rate locks up and it's the same thresholds and everything along those lines, but we eventually come around and rip our foe to pieces, picking up another kill. The only real difference in control surface responsiveness is that your elevator becomes slightly heavier, and that's within your ideal speed range of 375 to 575 km an hour, as referenced previously. But there's an actual positive about having this heavier elevator, and that because you have some additional mass on the plane, this actually detracts from the rudder wobble that you experience below 350 km an hour. Particularly when you go below 300 km an hour, you'll find it's not as prominent when coming out of manoeuvres, because the additional mass that starts to lean on the nose of the aircraft actually helps you to stabilise the plane, particularly when you've got the nose in a slightly depressed situation, say if you've got it dropped by minus 10 degrees from the level position. And that means that this plane actually feels a bit more comfortable at lower speeds to fly because you've got the pods equipped to it. And as for coming back to the concept of stall speed, where it's now gone up to 135 km an hour, your stall recovery is impacted and you now need to get to 230 km an hour, so that's an increase in 15 km an hour before you get your control surfaces back. But the recovery procedure is the same pleasant one as before. It's still gradual, you need to take time to build up your speed, but you'll get there and then you'll be back in the fight, so no problems. Now we've seen our plane being used primarily in a more boom and zoom nature so far, diving down on targets to try and hit them. And that's already starting to encourage an overall shift in gameplay perhaps, in that we're now starting to use our G2 trop in a more versatile interceptor boom and zoom centered manner, rather than focusing on particularly just using it as a fighter, obviously diving down on foes when they're below us, but not being as encouraged now to force our opponents into that 1 versus 1 in every single situation. And you'll see now that my focus is going to switch towards the enemy bombers, such as this G-2 that's storming in at low altitude. And this is something that's very nice about having the R6 modification. You can literally find a bomber at a distance, dive on them such as in this manner, and tear them to pieces before they're able to stay in the operating theatre for an extended period of time. As we come down, we just need a quick burst on target and that's them out of the game, and we can rinse and repeat. So what we've effectively given ourselves now is the firepower that's heading towards that of say a Focke-Wulf 190A series, the A4, the A8 or the A5. in that we have this firepower now that can absolutely shred a bomber as we pick up the assist on the P51 D5 Mustang there. And whilst I said earlier about the fact that you've taken away that edge of needing precision with just a single 20mm cannon, now you have 3 20mm cannon, you still need to be accurate. You're not going to be completely made up for the fact that if you're off target by a considerable margin, as we were with the Mustang, your shells are still going to hit the mark. There we were way off target to be able to hit it, and that's a mistake of my own, not the plane. Now coming around once again, we're getting ready to intercept the B-25 that's coming in, and there's this overall comfort of being able to bring down bombers rather easily now compared to what we may have experienced previously. If we were to make these strikes using the single 20mm cannon, perhaps our results will not be as consistent in being able to shred the bomber in a single pass, and on top of that we'd have to demand that greater precision in our shots. Nonetheless, what else is there to note in terms of energy retention perhaps? Well, when you're going into these dives and you decide to fly out in a straight line, so your straight line energy retention, previously we said that it was good, with 565 km an hour being the limit. Now it's the case that it's 550 km an hour, still good, but it's a drop by 15 km an hour, a minor adjustment to keep in mind. In the horizontal, your energy retention remains pretty much the same, whereas in the vertical there is a small change once again. In that if you now conduct a dive and use engine power alone to try and return to your starting altitude I should say, as a 30-degree return angle climb, previously you said it was 2,200 metres over which you could achieve this, i.e. the altitude range. It's now 2,000 metres, and in the case of war emergency power being added in, it's now 2,800 metres, not 3,000 metres, so a net overall drop of 200 metres. Nothing major as such, but it's still there, and you have to keep it in mind compared to the clean G2 chop, particularly if you're engaged in one of those, that it's able to actually follow you more closely when you're coming out of a boom and zoom dive. They've got a lot of energy as well. Now levelling out and looking towards the targets once again, we're trying to prey on another bomber potentially or cut through the opposition via boom and zoom pass. And that's why we tried to shift our overall gameplay mechanic to see both sides of the G2 chop here, that with the R6 modification you have those options available to you. We could of course get stuck in 1 versus 1s, but let's go focus those bombers down to demonstrate the differences in that firepower. Can't go for the P2 because we've got a number of opponents on the left hand side. We're thinking this Focke-Wulf 190 Anton may come directly towards us. They do, the A1, so we dodge over the top of them here, using our rudder to potentially hammerhead over. And we do so eventually and swing down on top of them now. Trying to get a clean shot on target here. We're going to pick up some hits. Are we going to get the kill though? Well, there's the critical hit and we can finish them off. Look towards that PBJ if needs be to cut them out of the sky as well. Now another thing to note with regards to your ammo capacity. You had plenty ammo in the case of the clean G2, but with the addition of the 2 pods you now go from having 200 cannon rounds to having the 200 plus a further 270, 135 per pod. Which means that running out of ammo in this plane is going to take a considerable period of time and reloads are going to be infrequent. The only reason I've been taking a reload between every single engagement is because I'm buying myself time naturally to go for successive reloads, something I do typically, but you don't have to feel forced to go for a reload every time you come out of an engagement. And it wasn't really the case with the clean G2 chop earlier, it's just a force of habit on my behalf. Is there anything else to note with regards to changes in performance of this aircraft then? Well, going through my notes, I can't see anything else. You're of course using the same belts with the 20mm pods as you are with the 20mm motor cannon, and really it's just a change in flavour I would argue. If you like your aircraft to be a dedicated fighter, i.e. that it's got maximum performance, it's got maximum manoeuvrability, and you're not too worried about firepower, then going with the clean G2 chop, i.e. no R6 modification, will probably be the preferred plane for you. Whereas if you like a bit more versatility, and the fact that you can bring down bombers more easily without too much of a penalty to the plane's overall performance, then taking the R6 modification is probably going to be your cup of tea. Personally for me, I prefer the plane clean. That's not because I enjoy the greater versatility, I like to fly my planes without any additional modifications equipped to them wherever possible. And I find that whilst it demands precision in the case of the clean G2 chop, at the same time that precision also makes for a nice bit of practice in terms of learning just to get used to the world of a single 20mm cannon again, whereas I've been spoiled in the past. Bring down this MB175T for another kill and breaking away off into the distance. That's our 9th kill of the game, and I believe that's going to be our last of this one as well. We just fly away off into the distance here back towards friendly lines, looking for the next boom and zoom opportunity as the ground units and the naval units start to really decline at a fast rate. But it's just personal preference really, and I wouldn't go out my way to recommend to anyone watching this video, yep, you should fly this plane with the R6 modification or you should not. It's entirely what you prefer to do. I'm always going to be that person who enjoys planes to be clean, so that's going to be my preference when you see me in the sky. I'll never have secondary modifications unless I absolutely necessarily have to do so. But I'm repeating myself a little bit there. So with our team now capturing A, the game comes to its end and it's time for us to take a look at the second set of post-game stats. By deploying our G2 trop in a more versatile form thanks to the R6 modification, now focusing more on the interception role rather than being a dedicated fighter, we're able to pick up 9 kills and a single assist, netting us 45,177 silver lions and 4,270 research points. When facing the BF-109 G2 trop in a one-on-one engagement, I would recommend 2 main approaches to defeating this aircraft. The first is a low altitude turn fight. Reason being, the G2 trop has trouble in scenarios where it cannot keep its speed above 350 km an hour. This difficulty manifests itself in the form of a wider turn circle, increase in elevator heaviness, and a rising trend for its rudder to wobble at the end of manoeuvres. If the turn fight is initiated below 2,000 meters altitude, you are taking away a small degree of the G2 trop's engine performance, and as the dogfight goes to lower and lower altitudes, you're also taking away the ability for the G2 trop to dive away from the engagement. However, even in these situations, defeating the G2 trop will not be easy unless you're flying a dedicated turn fighter such as the A6M5. This is due to the G2 trop's phenomenal rudder, which gives the aircraft the ability to maintain a tight turn circle despite the widening of its standard turn circle. Alternatively, the G2 trop can attempt to use their engine power to turn the engagement into a spiral climb with the aim of forcing you to stall out in their wake. In the former case, a lag roll can help you in following the G2 trop as they turn on their rudder, also providing you with some additional distance to help you stay on target. In the latter, a low yo-yo, altitude permitting, can provide you with the energy needed to follow the G2 trop as they enter the spiral climb. The second approach would be a high-speed dive. With the G2 trop's roll rate suffering at speeds in excess of 800 km an hour, this can make it difficult for the G2 trop to either follow a target or prove evasive in a high-speed dive against planes which retain their control surfaces well in such a situation, such as the P-51D-30 Mustang. In the former case, the G2 trop will be exposed to overshooting the target, giving you the ability to latch onto their six for a brief period to bring them down. Albeit if the G2 trop decides to play safe, they'll most likely break off at the first sign of a potential overshoot and begin to hold altitude above you. In the latter, this will force the G2 trop's flight path to be easier to follow as they attempt to roll their plane to make manoeuvres. Instead, the G2 trop may attempt to use a loop to shed speed and get onto your six. If you aim to anticipate such a manoeuvre, you can bring the G2 trop down before they even have completed a quarter of their loop. To wrap up, let's first recap the strengths and weaknesses of the BF-109 G2 trop. Its main strengths are: Number 1. Outright performance. For its battle rating, the G2 trop finds itself at the top end of many characteristics, including climb rate, vertical energy retention, and rudder. This enables the aircraft to assert dominance over most opposition, excluding those dedicated to a specific engagement type, for example the A6M5 for turn fighting, or the P-51D-30 Mustang for extreme speed combat. Secondly, versatility. Without the R6 modification, the G2 trop can be set up as a dedicated fighter. With this modification, the G2 trop can double up as a powerful interceptor with minor penalties to its fighter capabilities as conferred by the addition of the 20mm underwing gondolas. And thirdly, medium to high altitude performance. The G2 trop's best performance may be extracted within the altitude range of 2,500 to 5,500 meters, which is where most engagements for air supremacy will occur. This means the G2 trop will be its most dangerous throughout the match and can swiftly hunt down high altitude bombers who remain up high. As for its key weaknesses, Number 1. Demands precision. When flown without the R6 modification, the single 20mm MG151 motor cannon is your main source of damage output. With its high rate of fire, good muzzle velocity and tight spread, this cannon will prove lethal when well aimed, but frustrating when you are slightly off target, merely grazing foes instead of downing them. And secondly, low speed manoeuvrability. Below 300 km an hour, the G2 trop's elevator will become heavy and its rudder will have an increasing tendency to wobble at the end of manoeuvres. Whilst these issues do not completely undermine the aircraft's turn fighting capabilities, they do need to be carefully managed. As for my final opinion of the aircraft, the G2 trop represents the peak in the BF-109's lineage, building upon the strengths of the preceding F4 by filtering a more powerful engine and the option to triple its cannon armament. Whilst the plane still retains the weaknesses of the F4, especially with regards to low speed turn fighting, the G2 trop ensures that the BF-109 family not only remains relevant with increasing battle rating, but also dominant over most opposition, such that the G2 trop may be regarded as the Great Gustav. With that is all I've got time for today. For my next review in 2 weeks' time, i.e. Sunday the 16th of December 2018, I intend to review either Number 1, the Spitfire Mark 5B, the Tier 3 battle rating 4.0 British fighter, or Number 2, the P-40 F-10 Warhawk, a Tier 2 battle rating 2.3 American fighter. Which of these two aircraft I review is entirely up to you. You can cast your vote by using the hyperlink in the description of this video. Polling will close at 1200 hours GMT on Sunday the 9th of December 2018. But as always, I've been TX141. If you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, as always, take care and good luck in the skies.